This episode of All About the Gear is brought to you by BorrowLenses.com, who also provided the equipment we're reviewing today.
All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of All About the Gear. We haven't done an episode of All About the Gear in quite a while. Doug's been busy, I've been busy, all this crazy stuff has been happening. But between the last time we did an episode and now, there's been one or two interesting camera releases. So Doug is feverishly struggling to catch back up and to bring all of this wonderful technology news to you. And we're going to start today with what, Doug? The Nikon D810, right?
Today we have the Nikon D810. And you're right, it's been a while, so I hope we don't forget how to do these things.
Yeah.
But Photokina happened, and of course that's the probably major event on the planet for new camera announcements, and we had a few good ones. You're on your way to Photokina next week.
No, Photo Plus.
Photo Plus.
Yeah.
And of course by the time this airs, Photo Plus will be long since gone, but we'll expect some new announcements from there. So yeah, let's get into the D810. Let's take a look at it here.
Yeah, let's dive into this thing. So first of all, this is finally we get to break our rhythm of doing just these mirrorless cameras, and we can jump back into the DSLR. So this is one of Nikon's flagship cameras, right? So so tell me about it. What are the basics? Let's dive into just the basics. How much does it cost, and what are the cameras that this guy trumps or replaces?
Yeah. This is a nice new camera. The D810, as you might not be surprised to learn, is the successor to the D800 and the D800e. It replaces both of them.
Oh, okay.
The camera is $3,300, and like I say, it replaces both the 800 and the 800e. And the basics of the camera, for those who don't know those earlier ones, is that it's a 36 megapixel full frame sensor. Which means if you print it at sort of normal mode, you can get prints up to 30 by 20 inches.
Nice.
And if you want to extrapolate pixels, you can go much larger than that as well.
Yeah.
Very nice camera. I think the overall thing about this camera is that it is a refinement of a camera that was quite remarkable. When the 800s came out, they really sort of blew people away because they were 36 megapixels and really good quality.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of issues with them. Little niggly things that weren't quite right. They had autofocus problems. I owned a D800e.
Yeah, I remember.
We went back to Nikon twice for repairs in the autofocus system, and they never could fix it. For me, it became a camera that was a tripod-only camera.
Sure.
First of all, because the resolution is so high.
Yeah.
You wouldn't go around taking snapshots. The frames
with that higher resolution, Doug, it seems like a focus issue would kind of be a factor. I don't know.
Well,
what were you doing? What were you doing to compensate for that? Were you like bracketing focus to make sure you nailed it somehow, or what?
No, I used that camera only for manual focus. It was a landscape camera for me.
Yeah, sure.
If I wanted to go out and take pictures. I didn't really want to take a 36 megapixel camera. Now, the irony of this, of course, is that a few years from now, we'll look back and say, oh, yeah, it's sort of a medium res thing, 36 megapixels, right? So we'll look really silly in a couple of years, I think.
Yeah. It's like everyone's shooting with these terabyte cameras now. You guys are...
Yeah, what were they thinking?
Yeah, it's like us looking back at the Commodore 64, like, oh, yeah, 64K is all you'll ever need, Right. So price wise, you glossed over that. This is
$3,300.
Okay.
Which is, when we look at what that's compared to, we'll see some interesting numbers there, and that's sort of DSLR pricing now. Up above that 3,000 level for good DSLRs, not 100% pro cameras, but the high end of the Pro-Am line.
Yep.
Whereas mirrorless cameras, the top ones are in the 2,000 something range, down to the sub 1,000 range. So, Nikon's keeping it up there.
All right. Well, let's dive into the body and controls of this thing. Just sort of the overall ergonomics. And when I was shooting Nikon primarily, that was the thing that drew me in. You get a new Nikon box, that gold box that comes in the mail, or wherever you buy it from, and it's an experience. You pull that thing out, and it had a heft, a weight, and just the rubberized just in the right places, and it just felt like a weapon. You know,
Yeah.
does this one continue that trend?
It is. I mean, it's it feels good. It's got a new grip. The grip here is let me turn it the right way here. The grip on this side is a little different. It sticks out a little farther. It's a little thinner, but it feels pretty good. It is just a touch lighter by a couple of ounces than the D800s were. But it feels good, and we'll talk about shutter in a minute, but I don't know if you can hear this. Let's try this.
Yeah, I hear it.
Okay, so it has a nice feel. It's a solid camera. It's not the tank that you get out of a D4 or a Canon 1DX, but it is a solid feeling, good pro type camera. It's very well sealed. It's got rubber gaskets around the doors. It's got, the lenses have rubber gaskets if you get the good lenses.
Yep.
So it's a real solid feeling camera. They've moved a few of the controls around. We won't go into the details, they don't matter, but they've done a few things. There's this new I button down here. They've changed the way the autofocus button works a bit. You can see moving that into the camera view. That's a little different than it used to be. There are a bunch of little things, but overall, it's still a Nikon, and it feels and works like a Nikon, and anybody who's used to the Nikon ecosystem is going to be very comfortable with it.
And what do you know? What does that I button do? Is it just for information on the whatever image is on the screen?
Yeah, it brings up sort of a quick menu. It lets you access a few of the new features, like in live view, they have this split view where you can zoom in live view, but you can zoom in to two parts of the image, and you can scroll left and right. I don't know who wants this thing, but I guess they did it because they can.
Yeah.
So it's like a split image live view.
Huh. Oh, some engineer somewhere is happy because his feature made it in.
That's right. Exactly right. Exactly.
That's cool. So it feels good. It's a little bit lighter than the D800e, but overall it is still decidedly Nikon. This is a Nikon.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And anybody who's used to the high-end Nikons is going to be real comfortable with this. The controls are very Nikon. It fits like a glove, again, for a Nikon user. We use the Uncle Doug's exposure triangle test. It got 8 out of 12. And what happens, of course, in Nikon land, with DSLRs, you don't have any dedicated buttons for controls. There's no dedicated shutter button, shutter speed, no dedicated aperture. The various control wheels on the front and back, and things like that are used to control them. So if you want to, for example, if you want to change exposure compensation, you push the exposure compensation and then dial one of the dials. So it's not the same as having a dedicated exposure compensation button, but it's almost as good.
Yeah. No, I see in your notes here you wrote in here that it has in-camera HDR blending.
Yeah, that's a new thing where you actually take multiple exposures. We see that in the mirrorless cameras all the time now.
Yeah.
And I played with it. I wasn't too impressed. The fact is that this camera and a lot of the new high-end cameras have such a wide dynamic range.
Yeah.
Amazing dynamic range that the need for HDR is quite a bit less than it used to be even just a couple of years ago.
Right.
So I think that if you have a shot where you really need HDR because you're shooting in a dark room with a bright window and you want to see the stuff outside just as clear as the stuff inside, you're probably better off taking 2 exposures and blending them manually.
Right.
Really extreme cases like this. So I played with it. It does work. Not too impressive.
Not too impressive. Yeah. I would think when I think HDR, of course, the first face that pops into my head is Trey Radcliffe, right? But when I think HDR, I think, okay, you're going to sit down in front of the computer. You're going to do some, you're going to either create some. I see HDR in 2 camps, right? So there's the Trey camp where you're making art, and it's sort of an exaggeration of the scene that you're capturing, and then on the other side is where you're trying to more accurately represent what the eye can see, right? Because your eye using your brain processing, has a higher dynamic range than your camera does. So the highlights don't appear blown out, whereas they would in the camera. So, this looks like it's trying to do that more than create art per se, correct?
Yeah, and that's sort of part of the confusion of what we live with today, which is somebody says, I'm into HDR photography, and you say, well, wait a minute, is it the HDR look, the Trey Ratcliffe look you're going for, or are you doing architecture and real estate, and you need it for that? Right. Exactly. You're exactly right.
Yeah, like Jeffrey Totaro, who's on TWiP from time to time, our architectural photographer. So he comes on, he uses HDR all the time, but in a different way. So he's doing an exterior of a beautiful building somewhere. He's going to expose for the interior lights so that you can see into the home or building or whatever, but also for the outside, the landscape lighting, and then also for the building itself, and then bring all those in to Photoshop or whatever compositing tool he's using, and then selectively blend them. Not even programmatically like with Photomatics or something. I mean, he's doing the layered thing where, okay, I want this light to be a little bit brighter and I want this window to be darker, and I think that I look at that as the artisanship version of HDR as well, because now you're in there and you have all this data to play with, and you can almost play deity in there, and you're like, okay, I want the outside brighter, let's bring up the inside lights a little more.
Yeah, I mean it's all magic compared to the old days. See the gray hair here? If I go back to my old days in the motion picture business, we used to put dark orange gels over windows. That's how we would do it. So you wanted to shoot in a scene like that, you either blasted a lot of light in the interior or you went and you darkened the windows.
That's crazy.
Those are the two techniques.
Yeah, and look at us now.
Yeah, but it kept somebody employed, right?
Yeah, back to this camera. So when you were holding it up there, I saw something that looked like a pop-up flash on there. Does it have a flash?
Yeah, that's sort of an interesting thing, in these days, because so many cameras. Well, I shouldn't say so many. A lot of cameras don't have pop-up flash. This one does. It's pretty much the standard thing. You push the button and nothing happens. Where's my
awesome. I push the button and nothing happens.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
There it is.
So there it is. You push the button, the flash pops up, and it does sort of what you'd expect. Good for fill flash, handy.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is nowadays pro cameras don't have pop-up flash. So if you get a Nikon D4, I think the Canon 1DX, even the Sony A7s have no built-in flash.
Right.
Part of it is having enough room to put it in the case of the little guys. But the pros, they figure, you don't really need one. This can, of course.
I like it though. I mean, I think pop-up flash is important. Of course, I'm shooting mirrorless now, and most, if not all, of my cameras have pop-up flash on them. But not that it's nice to have it there in those instances where you want to just splash a little bit of light on a subject, but also for control of external strobes.
That's right. So you can use the built-in flash to trigger those external strobes. In the case of Nikon and Canon, of course, they have a very elaborate strobe communication thing, so you can actually control the strobes remotely from the camera.
The CLS, the Nikon Creative Lighting System.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. But even if you just want to trigger stupid strobes that only respond to the strobe going off, it's very handy. In the case of the big pro bodies, of course, you have to add a controller, which is essentially a strobe.
Yep. Okay. Now, what about memory or memory card slots on this?
Yeah, Nikon's been playing some interesting games with this for quite a while now, and this one's sort of a little goofy. So this one has in the back here, it has room for an SD card and a CF card. Now you might think, okay, and the D800s had the same thing. You might say, well, that's sort of cool. I could use either one, but suppose you want to use both. Suppose you want redundancy, or you want to be able to automatically switch to the second card when the first one's full, which those are the two modes I would think you'd use most often.
Yeah.
Then you got to carry two different kinds of cards around.
Yeah.
So
you got to buy two different kinds of cards.
Yeah. And most of us, would like to just have one kind of card, I think. And I would say most photographers probably only have one camera.
Yeah.
So this is a little bit strange. They're trying to be all things to all people. In the big D4s, they have a CF card and an XQD card. And I got to tell you, I had a D4S a couple of weeks ago. I was shooting the Blue Angels. The CF slot died, and I went trying to find an XQD card, and you can't get them. You can't buy them anywhere.
So you got to order them.
Sort of a mistake. So
yeah.
Anyway,
I don't know, SD. Maybe this is a whole different All About the Gear, talking about memory storage, in camera, SD versus CF. But for me, SD is awesome. They're smaller, they're lighter, they're cheaper in some instances. My computer has an SD slot on it. Most other devices that I have will take an SD slot. My TV has an SD slot on it. My car has an SD slot in it. I want SD. It's kind of the standard now. just quickly, from Uncle Doug's standpoint, what are the benefits of having a CF card over an SD, other than the obvious of it feels more robust on the CF side?
I think the only advantage is it's harder to lose.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, I don't see any reason. I think there are SD and CF cards now that are up to half a terabyte. So you can get a 512 gigabyte card, I think, in either format.
512 in either form. Yeah. See.
Yeah. I mean, it costs as much as a fancy camera, but it's
yeah.
For the video guys, that's terrific. So I think I'm with you. It's just tradition at this point, having the old card. It's like carrying around 5-inch floppies. What's the advantage? They're hard to lose.
I mean, come on. I mean, at some point, you're like, you know what? I could carry around a small phone, but instead, I'm going to buy a giant phone so I don't lose it. I mean,
that's right.
Come on.
Yeah,
all right, let's move on. So
for old people.
Yeah, I'm getting there. I got some gray in there. So.
I see.
So the shutter and the sensor are in this. So sort of the internal mechanics of this guy. Nikon, again, known for sort of bulletproof, mechanics that are clockwork. Does that carry through into this body?
Yeah. I mean, again, this is the refinement of a camera that was, pretty good to begin with, but now it's really sweet. Standard thing, an 8,000th of a second mechanical shutter. It now shoots up to 5 frames a second.
Yep.
It was 4 in the versions before. It actually shoots a little faster if you put it in a DX mode. DX is the crop sensor mode where you use cropped lenses and throw away the edges of the frame.
Yep.
They've added something which is an optional electronic front curtain, meaning that if you're in live view mode, if you think about this, live view, the shutter is open. Yep. So that the sensor can see what's coming in from the lens. And if you take a picture, the first thing that normally happens is the shutter has to close and then reopen. So electronic front curtain shutter says, let's not bother closing it. Let's just keep the shutter open, erase the sensor, and then close it at the end of the exposure. And the advantage of that is that it does a great job to minimize the vibration in the camera. So
Doug, I gotta say, because what you just described is a mirrorless camera. Why are they like dancing all around the party instead of just joining the party? Why don't they just take that mirror out of this camera and make it a mirrorless camera, so all the Nikon people can have all those benefits and with no mirror and without all these sort of acrobatics in the middle?
I think you may have just asked the question of the year. I mean, seriously, what's up with that?
Yeah,
I mean,
what's up with that? Yeah.
This camera, and I'll tell you why. First of all, when you have an SLR, a single lens reflex, you have an optical viewfinder, and there are many cases where being able to see light that actually is coming through the lens is really nice. Mm-hmm. So that's handy. Yep. The other is autofocus, because this has an autofocus sensor other than what's on the image sensor, and it allows, at this stage in technology, and we're not going to say this next year, but at this stage, it allows cameras like this to autofocus more quickly and more accurately than they can do in live view or mirrorless.
Sure.
So that's it. The reasons for it are rapidly disappearing, but there are a few advantages still from having an SLR.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just recently, just a couple days ago, picked up my iPhone 6, and it has that sort of intelligent focusing algorithm magic fairy dust in it, and I'm thinking, we're here in 2014 recording this, and these sort of stick in your back pocket type devices can focus like that. What are we going to see in, say, 2018, and where will mirrored cameras be when the whole "I can focus faster than you" argument has been solved programmatically? I don't know.
And again, a big picture question here, but a year from now, you're going to see it very common for mirrorless cameras to make up for most of the deficiencies, and the reason you'll have big, heavy DSLRs is going to be primarily things like just strength of the body and weather sealing.
Yeah.
But that's going to come maybe the year after, and then you're going to say, wow, I really don't have a reason for one of those big, ugly things.
Yeah, because that Olympus EM1, that's weather sealed, right? That's a
not the same as the big Nikons and Canon, but pretty good.
Okay.
Pretty good.
Good enough for a lot of people, I would say.
That's right.
Okay. Okay. So what's next? What else?
Okay. So they've they've solved some problems. Again, there were, like I say, problems with autofocus. There were thermal problems in the D800. If you get a D810, there were, even on the D810, some initial problems with white pixels, and if you happen to have an old one, they did a recall, you can send it back, but anything you buy today is likely to have the fix built in.
Yep.
You can tell by looking at a little black dot inside the tripod socket or a blue dot on the box.
Okay.
But the image quality is extraordinary. The dynamic range, spectacular, beautiful color. You can take this thing pretty comfortably up to ISO 1600, even 3200, and just get terrific images. It's not like a D4S or a Sony Alpha 7S that go, all the way up to 409,600 ISO. But
that is just crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's about it's within 3 stops of those really night vision cameras.
So, Doug, just a quick question. I know, on the back end, behind the curtain, a lot of these camera manufacturers obviously use parts from other camera manufacturers. For example, you'll find Sony parts in a lot of the Nikons and Panasonics, etc. Why, on a flagship body like this, why not license and use, say, an A7S type sensor in here to give you that crazy, magical, dark matter, light sensitivity type functionality?
Well, this particular camera, Sony has the same thing. They have an A7S, which is, night vision, and they have the A7R, which has essentially the same sensor as is in this camera, and that's a high res.
Mm-hmm.
So in the high res camera, 36 megapixels, your individual pixels are physically very small because you've got more of them in the same size frame.
Right.
The A7S, the D4S from Nikon, those have much bigger pixels, and it's real simple. Bigger pixels can capture more light.
Right.
So, you're not going to see the same high ISO performance in a high resolution camera. Those two are sort of at odds with one another. You go one way or the other.
Right. It's that whole, it's like the exposure triangle, right? So
That's right.
You can have this, but you lose that, vice versa. Cool.
And that's why, I happen to have a high ISO camera and a high res camera for different jobs.
Yeah, see that, and that's what you just said. I think falls on, a lot of photographers don't get that. It's you spend this much money for a camera, especially one like this. You expect it to do everything that you could possibly ever want to do with a camera, from long exposures to low light exposures to shooting sports to shooting portraits to shooting landscapes and all that. And you can to some degree, but when you get to the extremes in there, that's when you need to be specialized, right? You get to the extremes in low light, you're going to need an A7S, or you're just not going to get the shot. Or if you go to the extremes in action sports, you're at the Olympics and you need to catch the pole vaulter in mid action over the bar, you probably want one of these digital SLRs and not a mirrorless camera, correct? Mm-hmm.
Yes, unless you have an A6000.
Unless you have A6000, yeah.
No. Yeah. But you're right.
Yeah, but all that, the roads are converging, right? So at some point, what I just said is going to be moot, and it's going to be, okay, just go buy this thing and you're good to go.
Yeah. When I wanted to shoot the Blue Angels, I rented a Nikon D4S because it can shoot 11 frames per second, and 99.9% of them are in focus. Yeah. And I can't really do that with any other camera that it's made today. So it gets specialized.
Yeah. Right tool for the right job right now.
That's right.
All right. So what about connectivity? Right. So we wireless and whatnot. Are we good to go? Can I connect to that with my new iPhone 6 and live view and all that stuff?
No. No. You can't connect to anything with these.
No. You can connect a cable to it, right?
You can hook a cable up to it. That's right. I mean, you can shoot tethered. That's pretty good. There are a lot of cameras out there that won't shoot tethered. And that's where you can, for people who don't know that, where you run a cable between your camera and your laptop and you control the camera from the laptop. Yeah. But no Wi-Fi, no NFC.
Images off to it. Yeah, see, and that, again, I don't know, maybe I'm weird, but I was on this shoot in Napa 2 days ago. It was just a little simple corporate shoot, some executive portraits and whatnot. And at the end of the session, the client, the requester, thanked me and all that, and I was able to pull one of the images of her actually off the card from the GH4 onto my little iPhone, made a couple tweaks and sent them to her and said, yeah, here you go. The rest of the images will be posted soon, yada, yada, yada. Her socks were blown off that I was able to do that quickly, and I don't know if I want to give that ability to do that real time up. I don't know that, I think Pandora's box has been opened for touchscreens and Wi-Fi connectivity. I don't know.
No, but you're missing the point, Frederick. The point is you should be able to say to her, I'm a professional, and these things take a lot of time and a lot of effort.
I blew it.
And so I'm not going to be able to get images to you for at least a week because of all the work that I have to put into them in the darkroom.
No. Yeah, I don't work like that.
If you make it look too easy, you're going to have to lower your rates.
No, negative. Contrarily, I'll charge for speed. I was like, okay, if you want this tomorrow, there's a premium associated with this. However, if you can wait a week or two, then the price will be slightly lower.
Yeah, but you have to watch out because the argument is, hey, my 17-year-old daughter can do that. Why are you charging me money?
Yeah, but your 17-year-old daughter is not Frederick Van Johnson. So it's perception, all that. I don't know. So I don't know. I'm turning into the curmudgeon old man when I look at this stuff, but it's all good. All right. So what about competition? So
okay.
Who does this stack up against?
Yeah, normally this is a hard question for me to answer, but this time it's pretty easy. There are really, in my mind, two competitors to this. The first one that comes to mind is the Canon 5D Mark III, the new Canon 5D.
Mm-hmm.
It's the one camera that's made by Canon that's close to this in that it's $100 more, $3,400 for the body only. It's 22 megapixels instead of 36 megapixels in this camera, but that's still pretty respectable. It's a great camera. I think the real difference is the old Canon versus Nikon argument, and we're not going there. The 5D Mark III is a great camera that's built to the same quality as this one, I would say. Workhorse cameras, weather sealed, pretty rock solid. So that's the competition here. You spend $100 more for the Canon, and you get about 2/3 as many pixels.
So these guys they're competing with each other and one-upping each other in that little microcosm, or that large microcosm of DSLRs. So
yeah, the fact is that there are people who are leaving the Canon camp for the Nikon camp because they want the higher resolution that you can get from this camera, and a lot of landscape shooters are doing just that. But we may be back next year saying that Canon's got a 40 megapixel camera.
Yeah.
The other one is the Sony A7R, and this is a serious competitor because it's the same 36 megapixels. It's almost the identical sensor. It costs $1,200 less, which is 36% less. Essentially the same image quality as this camera in what I think you'd consider a non-pro body. I think that's the big difference. And it's it's lighter, it's smaller, it's cheaper, virtually the same image quality, but it has not a good autofocus. It doesn't have anywhere near the lens selections or other things that we refer to as ecosystem. You can always use adapters, but the fact is for $1,200 more to get the Nikon, you have a whole lot more choices available to you, and you have a more rugged camera.
Yeah, and you look at the, that shot of Nikon's lens lineup, and it's just amazing, right? I mean, they've been at this for years with the Nikon, with their glassworks over there, and it's just an amazing lineup of glass that no one can beat, I don't think. Well, Canon is probably up there, but
sure.
Yeah.
Now, I went to Iceland with our good friend Martin Bailey.
Yeah.
I just got back a couple of weeks ago, and there were 14 photographers on the trip. I was the only one who was mirrorless. Everybody else was D810s, 5D Mark II, 5D Mark III.
Wow. And how did they fare versus you?
They laughed at me, but I got to tell you, I am a camera abuser. Mm-hmm. I take all my lens caps off. I leave them in the hotel room. I change lenses in the field. I change lenses in the rain. I don't cover my camera to keep it from getting wet. Good. My Sony cameras never missed a beat, and some of those D810s and 5D Mark IIIs stopped working in the rain. So, it's not a controlled test, but I did just fine, and my images are, if they're not as good as the other guys, it's not the camera's fault.
Good. That's a good way to put it. I like it. Cool. All right. Well, let's wrap this up. So you know what I'm going to ask, right? So the final question is always at the end of these All About the Gear episodes is, who's this for? Who's the
Okay.
target audience for this new Nikon D810?
And that's a fun question this time. Usually it's sort of, I don't know. So the D800, as I said earlier, to me was a tripod landscape camera. Autofocus was weak or buggy, and the frames per second rate wasn't very good. Nikon has addressed both of those issues and a few others. So you now have a 36 megapixel, which is really a good general purpose camera.
Yeah.
It works fine handheld. It autofocuses quickly. It has a pretty decent frame rate. You could even shoot sports with this, although I would suggest using JPEG only, because if you start going into continuous mode at 36 megapixels, not only are you going to fill up cards, but you're going to get home with images that take forever to upload to your computer.
Yeah.
But the fact is that in the past, the D800, you wouldn't think of it as a camera you could use as a general purpose, shoot anywhere kind of camera. This camera you can, and I think that's a credit to Nikon for having refined something that they put out there a year later and make this into a really sweet camera.
Love it. Love it. The D810 from Nikon 3300. Would you run out and buy this camera now, Doug?
Put it this way. I sold my D800e and switched to the Sony A7R, and I'm not looking back. So personally, again, we've been through this on lots of other episodes. I'm totally in the mirrorless camp now, and I wouldn't. But if you're in any way committed to the Nikon ecosystem, this gets a strong recommendation.
Love it. Perfect. Good way to put it. All right, Doug, that's awesome. I know you've got a lot of gear in your hands that we're going to be talking about in upcoming episodes of All About the Gear. What's next? What's on deck?
The next episode of All About the Gear is going to be a real special. Oh, was that the doorbell? Oh, that was your doorbell. Today, you and I are both getting brand new iMac 27-inch with 5K display iMacs, and we're going to be reviewing those. Take a little step outside the normal. Talk about the new iMacs. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I can't wait. That's going to be exciting.
Yeah, I think and both of us are working with some pretty old machines here, and it's about time for the upgrade, I would say.
Yep. People say, hey, you're so lucky you're getting a new iMac. I've been saving for this iMac for a while. I knew it was coming. I got my money ready, and I ordered it the day it came out. So, I feel like with the new TWiP network, it's justified. With all the new shows that we're doing, I need that horsepower to make things a little bit more efficient. So it's all good. Right.
And then after that, we're going to come back to Nikon land, and we're going to do the Nikon D750, which is the replacement for the D700.
Excellent. Back to Nikon land again.
Okay.
Cool. All right, man. Well, thank you. I think this is good. I'm excited to see what's coming up next on the network.
Yeah, me too. Thanks a lot, Frederick.
All right. See you soon.